in a home where both Polish and English were spoken. Of course, they tried to use Polish, the adults did, to keep secrets from us kids. I showed them. I took it in school. Ha! Wasn't going to put up with it. And so, but then the other kids would come to me. What'd they say? What'd they say? But also, for those of you who are a little bit older may remember how back in the 60s, it had become something of a fad to tell Polish jokes. Now, they were the same jokes about being stupid that were told about Italians in some areas. They were all jokes just about how dumb people were. And I really resented those. I never liked that. There are funny things about being Polish, and I love to joke about them. But being stupid isn't one of them. And the same is true for every other ethnic group. They're not stupid because of their ethnicity. If they're stupid, they do it on their own. This is something that we will take on with them, but we don't make fun of people. So I had something of an extra pride in being Polish, and that's why I was attracted to Saint Andrew Boboli. But that's not a good reason. Ethnic identity is something that tells us a lot about where we come from and who we are. And I appreciate that identity tremendously. But there is always something about each individual that is equally deep and profound, distinct from the family they came from. I'm, again, very proud of the fact that my uncle and aunt hid a family of Jews in their root cellar, and that some of my cousins hid Jews on the back of their farm, and this was extremely dangerous. But they were the ones who were courageous in doing that, not I. I can be proud of them, but I didn't do it. They did. And I'm proud of what they accomplished. And that's why I say that ethnic identity is something that's good and fine, but it has its limits. And I saw that with Andrzej Boboli. And so I read a biography. I think it's the only English biography of Saint Andrzej, and I doubt that it's in print. It was in our novice library when back in the 60s. And I'd like to talk to the people at the Jesuit printing press about seeing if that could come back as a paperback. That wouldn't be bad. It was good to read. And there were three things that I got from his truly heroic life and exemplary life. It's good reason that he's a saint. And there are three things that I think I've sought to emulate, and I think can apply to all of us. First, it was something I could relate to. He grew slowly in virtue. It wasn't easy. In a lot of ways, when I grew up, my mother would say to me over and over again, "Ty upartym Polakiem," you stubborn Pole. And I think there's something of that's part of the national character. It also leads to great courage at times, but it is stubbornness. And he had a lot of that. He came from a pretty good family, minor nobility, and he had a certain stubbornness in him that took quite a number of years to overcome. And the superiors truly considered asking him to leave the Jesuits, but they waited. There's that wonderful passage in the Gospel of Luke when a man goes into his vineyard and sees that the fig tree still didn't have fruit. And he says, cut it down. That was sort of what the superiors thought. But the gardener says, no, let me hoe and manure it one more year and see if it bears fruit. Well, this is a lot of times what happens in life. You get hoed and manured. And this is a lot of times how we grow. These, we can have all sorts of expressions about how nasty that is. And I'm sure the fig tree didn't like having manure put on it in contrast to the flowers that it had on its branches. But this is the way that it grows. And oftentimes the difficult, smelly things of life, are what make us grow. And I certainly could relate to that. And that he had slow progress. Some of the saints are very exemplary in growing quickly in virtue. He wasn't that way, and I could relate to that. So that's important for us to remember. Our growth in holiness is essential, but it may take time. We don't all, get converted in a moment and everything is all great. Again, those of you who are married may have had similar experiences. Getting married to somebody doesn't mean that, right after the honeymoon, it's a perfect wife and a perfect husband. Usually it takes time and growth. And we should all learn from that aspect, that we keep on growing and you don't stop, but you don't give up on that growth. And like the superiors who changed their mind not to give up on andrzeja Boboli, we don't give up on each other, not on our kids, not on our spouses, not on our friends. And, as I've talked to couples and helped them work through crises in marriage where they just want to get a divorce and they work it through, and later on they can say, it would have been a bad idea to separate. I'm glad we stayed together. It's hard, but that's the manure. And this is how we grow. The second thing that, I came to really like about him is that he went to a place where others didn't go. He was working in what was the eastern part of the Commonwealth of Poland. Poland was, in many ways, a fascinating place. In the 1500s, as we know, the Protestant Reformation started. In 1517 in Germany with Luther, and in Switzerland with Zwingli. And as it grew, different countries and duchies and counties and all the other divisions within Europe began dividing up by religion. And they went to war, the emperor, Holy Roman Emperor versus the Schmalkaldian League and other battles, and really got terrible. During the life of Saint andrzeja Boboli, with the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. And they developed a principle, cuius regio, huius religio. Whoever was king, that's the religion. And so whatever the religion of the king was, that's our religion. And it's not a good principle. The Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania didn't do that. They're the only kingdom in Europe that gave freedom of religion. The king of Poland knew that if he went to war over religion, it would have been a slaughter, because Poland included Muslim Tartars and Eastern Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian Orthodox, and large parts of Poland, especially in the West, became predominantly Lutheran. A lot of folks don't remember that part of Polish history. The king and the nobility stayed Catholic, But big chunks of Poland were Lutheran, and it became the majority religion by 1550. And it also had a lot of Calvinists, especially in the South. And this would have been a bloodbath, and Poland opted against it. But there still were religious tensions. And quite frankly, one of the reasons I'm sure he was attracted to the Society of Jesus is that the Jesuits turned the Lutherans around by opening the best schools in Poland. And this was a clever thing. Jesuits oftentimes, when we're doing things right, we're very clever. The Jesuits opened up 30 theaters in Poland. And they would put on biblical plays and tell Bible stories in the plays. And they wrote them all in Polish. And there are lots of these that have been rediscovered. And what was clever is they would do these plays based on the books that the Lutherans had taken out of the Bible. And these are great stories. The story of Judith, the story of Tobit. These are just great stories. The book of Maccabees, 1 and 2 Maccabees. Lots of great episodes, and they're very dramatic. They lent themselves to plays, and people love the play and get excited. I think they used to be in our Bible. What'd they do with that? And they said, well, let's go back to the Catholics. So they did this. But that was in the cities, in the South and in the West. St. Andrew went to where nobody else was. And this was in the eastern part of the Commonwealth. And a big part of what he did was to go to villages. People did not know their faith. They did not know the catechism at all. The catechism was being written by another Jesuit, a German, St. Peter Canisius. And they didn't know much of the faith. And St. Andrzej Bobula would bring the catechism and teach them the basics of the faith. And the folks, there's a very important principle that occurs in life. When somebody loses faith in God, they don't believe in nothing. They'll believe in anything. This was a great principle stated by G.K. Chesterton. If somebody loses their faith in God, they don't believe in nothing, they'll believe in anything. That's why in a lot of places, even in the United States, people start going into witchcraft. You had, I forget who that singer was from the 60s, who started these 900 numbers where you can call in to get your spiritist. Somebody could read your mind and give you, horoscopes, and they were doing your fortune and all this, and you're paying all this money. Every newspapers tend not to like the Catholic Church. Instead, they all have horoscopes. Superstition comes in, and that was the situation in these villages. They didn't know the faith, so they went to superstitions of all kinds. And this is what came, and he was helping them to get rid of that. And I think I know, in fact, that since 1968 in the United States, we have been living in a time where people have not learned their faith very well. I taught at universities, and especially when I taught the undergrads, grad students knew more. They were well prepared. But my undergraduate students, every year during the first semester, I would give them on a test, write out the 10 commandments. Maybe I'd get 1 or 2 from each student. And sometimes they just make stuff up that had nothing to do with the commandments of God. I don't know where they got this stuff. And then I would ask them to do it again on the midterm. And they still might only get one more commandment. And then I would do it again on the final. Usually by the final, they got 4 out of the 10. But they didn't know the 10 commandments. And they certainly had no idea of the 7 sacraments. They had never read their Bible. My course was a course in the Bible. So they were reading it for the first time. But they just don't know the most basic things. And this is part of the mission we share with St. Andrew. That teaching the basics of the faith is very important. We have lots of our Catholic politicians who are pretty light on the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Plenty of Catholic politicians encourage abortion and euthanasia, killing the elderly and the sick. There are plenty of them who do that. Why do you think they do that? Those older ones especially know the 10 commandments, but they do it because they want to save money for the government. That's not my words. That's the words of Nancy Pelosi on the George Stephanopoulos program, where she said, we have to have abortion in the new health care bill. Think of all the money we'll save. That was her reason. We don't do things against the commandments of God to save money for the government. We come up with solutions to save life. And this is where it comes into a real aspect of things. We want to make sure that we are teaching all the commandments of God, as well as the other truths that people don't know about the Blessed Trinity. Again, the 7 sacraments, precepts of the church, the corporal works of mercy, all things that were basic. And this is part of the reason so many people leave the church. They don't know what we even believe. So this is our mission, like it was Saint Andrzej Boboli. The third thing is that he also was willing to go out and bring reconciliation to the Eastern Orthodox churches. Already, around by his time, there had been at the Council of Florence and at the Union of Brest that they had come to agreement so that you could keep the Eastern liturgy, pray in Old Church Slavonic, and celebrate the way you had, but to become back into union with the whole church and with the Pope. And he reconciled so many. He was known as the hunter of souls. And the Greeks, the Eastern Orthodox, called him the thief of souls because he reconciled so many. And for that reason, he sought that union even when it put him in danger of death, and death he received. When you go to the report on his martyrdom, the Office for Canonizing Saints said that nobody in the history of the church suffered as much torture in their martyrdom as Saint Andrzej Boboli. They put him as number 1, and he had a lot of stiff competition for that. Lots of people, suffered horrible torture. He even more than the rest. And one of the ways that we know it is not just by some reports that were made by witnesses, but his body still has not decayed. When you go to the shrine of Andrzej Bobula in Warsaw, his body is beneath the altar, the main altar of the church, and there is a glass sarcophagus around him, a glass casket, and you can see his body. You'd have to look at it closely to see the things, but when they looked at him closely, they could, at the time they took his body out, and brought it to Rome, they examined it carefully, and they could see all the tortures. For instance, they carved vestments. They said, "You want to be a Roman priest?" So they carved the chasuble into his skin, and then poured salt into it. And that was not the worst of what they did to him. And the torture went on for a long time. So it was truly, truly horrible. But he kept praying through all of it. And this is something that we also need to remember. Right now, we are not experiencing much persecution in the church right now. But that's right now. The 20th, we think of the martyrs back in the time of the Romans. That wasn't the big time of martyrdom. In the whole history of the church, there are 75 million martyrs that died for Christ over the last 2,000 years. 40 million of them died in the 20th century. They were killed, a big number of them, by the Third Reich, by the Nazis, in the name of nationalistic socialism. Even more were killed by the communists. In Russia, of course, and the Eastern satellites, and in Asia, wherever communism was, they killed more people than any other movement in the history of the world, including the majority of martyrs. And I don't know that it's all over. We saw back in 2020, remember all the riots? There were also lots of Catholic churches that were burned and attacked. Statues of Mary were desecrated. The parish where I used to help in Dallas, the statue of the Blessed Mother was desecrated. And all around the country, statues of Our Lady in the yards, in churches, little shrines. And we didn't see, and some churches were set on fire out in California especially. Now, we didn't see Catholics getting killed. But these are some angry people who don't have the Ten Commandments in their mind. And they could move that way if they had the opportunity. Hopefully they never will. We don't want to see that happen. But we also have to seek reunion with the other churches, and they're not going to be the ones that persecute us. But we want to seek the lost souls who have left Christianity, who have turned to anger and hatred. Hatred of our country, hatred of God, hatred of the church. We want to go out to them. And even if it means, like St. Andrew, that it could lead us to suffering and death, so be it. But like him, we'll be faithful and help to bring Christ into our society. This is something that is three things that would be very necessary. Our own gradual growth in holiness, teaching people the faith, and seeking unity within the church and the nation, even to the point of laying down our lives. This is what God asked of St. Andrew. And here, hopefully it'll just be that nobody dies, but that we pray for that and seek those things and act on them. You have any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, the Lord bless you all and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And if you'd like to join us downstairs, you are more than welcome.
Thank you, Father Mitch, for sharing your wisdom with our pilgrims and sharing the life story of the Saint Bobola. I want to only mention, my friends, that this statue you see is some unusual, because when this church was built in 1954, all altars and the statue were ordered in Italy and made is hand carved by famous family who work for Vatican. So all altars were brought from Italy to this newly built church. And what is also unusual, that as you read the story of the relic of Saint Bobola, his relic was taken by Russian to Moscow after, the miracle on Vistula River on 1923. If you want to, because it is a long story, you go to the website and read the story of rescuing the relic of Saint Bobola, because this relic was moved by Russian because they were not happy that Polish people were relying on help of Saint Bobola, because on 1920th the Russian wanted to enter the port of Warsaw, and the Cardinal of Warsaw asked all the faithful in Warsaw to pray the Nowenna to Blessed Andrew Bobola. And at the end of this Nowenna, miracle happened. Our Lady appeared on the sky in front of the Russian soldiers, and they were scared and they gave up. So after this, Russian, when they got this news that Polish people rely on help of Saint Bobola, they took his coffin to Moscow to stop the devotion. But miracle happened because God, at this time, was big famine in Russia. About 12 million died because of the famine. So Pope Pius XI sent the two American Jesuits, Father Louis Gallagher and Edmund Walsh, with the humanitarian mission to help the hungry people. And they were buying grain in America, sending to Russia, and in this way they convinced to release the relic. And after this they brought the relic to Rome, and it was canonized in 1938. But after that, the Father Louis Gallagher came back to America, became the president of Boston College, and where they were building this new church, they have the pastor of St. Joseph had connection with Father Gallagher from Boston College, and I am sure that he convinced him to give the name of the new built church St. Andrew Bobola. And Father Gallagher was also present during the dedication of this church in 1954. We have very nice pictures we are going to publish soon. But this is very famous that this American Jesuit was in this church when Bishop Wright came to bless this new church. So, my friends, you can read more stories about Saint Bobola on our website. You have also the Father Nizhnik, the priest from Strachocina Shrine, who had the vision of Saint Bobola, wrote a new book. And in this book, you have also the story of his life, martyrdom, and also some connection with Dudley. Because what happened in Dudley is something unusual. This is also, for me, is miracle. I'm the pastor here for 11 years, and I was planning to go to Bishop to close this church. And we can read the book, so you will, read the whole story, how St. Andrew Bobola saved this church. And also, many miracles happened in this church too. One of them was last year when our parishioner was healed from the cancer. And in this way, God confirmed that Saint Bobola wants to have shrine. So please read the book. You have chance to buy this book even after this mass. But I'd like to invite you tomorrow for the dedication, and every Sunday we have masses for pilgrims. And I would like to invite you downstairs to join Father Pakwa for the chat and have some refreshment. Thank you.